welcome back to my channel. This is part 3 of our series about the early years of what would become the city of Boston. If you missed any of the earlier episodes, be sure to check out our playlist. And if you'd like to learn more about how cities grow from wilderness to the modern day, be sure to subscribe. As we left off in episode 2, the town of Boston was having a pretty rough winter. Governor Bellingham had just died. The General Court was about to take its first break for the season, and most people were looking forward to warmer weather. But there was one bright spot for the struggling settlement, a young minister named John Harvard. He'd been called to the New North Church, which at that point was still in Cambridge, but he was gone now moved to the settlement of Boston, and he brought with him a lot of books. Now, before we get into it, let me say this. When we think of famous rich people who donated money or land for public good, we usually think about multi-million-dollar buildings being named after them or statues being erected in their honor. But back then, the concept of namesake buildings wasn't really a thing. In fact, there was only one other case where something was named after an individual. And that was the island of Manhattan, which was named after a small island off the coast of England. So what we're about to see here is actually one of the earliest known instances of a building being named after a person. But back then, ministers didn't make much money, so why did this young man have so many books? Well, the story goes that when John Harvard graduated from Emmanuel College, the school president noticed that John didn't have a set of books to call his own. See, back then, when students wanted to study, they had to borrow books. So the president lent him a complete set of the 326 volumes that he needed to graduate. John promised to return the books when he got to New England, but unfortunately, he never made it back to England alive. But he did send back a letter saying, "I cannot sufficiently express the deep sense I have of the obligations I am under to you, nor the ardent desire I have to do something worthy of your great kindness to me." He then went on to explain that he was now a minister, and his congregation was helping pay for his travel expenses to New England. Then he said, "When God shall release me from my present engagements, I shall give it my utmost to make some return of my indebtedness to you." Unfortunately, the letter doesn't tell us exactly what he planned to do. But according to tradition, he intended to repay the debt by starting a school in New England. In 1638, while serving a church in Charleston, he began collecting donations for the project. But just 2 years later, John Harvard became ill and died. But before that, he made one major change to his will. You see, his original plan was to leave half of his estate to his widow and half to his church. But now he left all of his property to his widow, and then stipulated that half of his estate should go to establishing a school in New England. He also added that the books that he'd borrowed should be returned to Emmanuel College. John Harvard never saw the settlement of Boston, but his widow, Elizabeth, did. After John died, she moved to Charlestown where she married Reverend Increase Mather. Then in 1642, she traveled to England to visit family and friends. While she was gone, Increase Mather was named minister of the First Church in Boston. That same year, she sent her brother Thomas to oversee the liquidation of her estate. Upon his arrival, Thomas began selling off John Harvard's belongings and using the money to purchase school books. These books were then turned over to Increase Mather. Then in 1643, Elizabeth joined them in Boston, and the three of them met with the General Court. At the time, the court was meeting in the home of Richard Fairbanks, which is why the building is sometimes referred to as the Old State House. Now, this meeting probably wasn't on the agenda because not much is known about it. However, Increase Mather later wrote about the event in a letter to his friend John Bridgman. In the letter, he says, "Mrs. Harvard, the widow of the late Mr. Harvard, who died in England, not long since came over into New England. She brought with her the books belonging to her late husband's library, which were very considerable. She delivered them to me and desired I would present them to the ministers and elders of the jurisdiction to set up a free school. And so we have done." So we know that they brought the books with them to this meeting, but we don't know if they brought all of the books or just a portion of them. We also don't know if they intended to use the donation to start a school, or if it was just an offer to help with an existing project. However, by 1646, it seems like everyone knew what was going to happen because in September of that year, the General Court passed a law to establish the new college in New England, but it was short-lived. Shortly after it was founded, it merged with the nearby Harvard College. So what happened next? Well, in 1647, Thomas Danforth, who was the treasurer of the colony, presented an account to the General Court that showed the amount of money that John Harvard left for the college. According to the records, Increase Mather received £797, 14 shillings and 9 pence. From that amount, he paid £221 for the books, and then used the rest of the money to purchase land for the school. According to legend, Increase Mather then presented the books to the General Court while they were meeting in the home of Richard Fairbanks, aka the Old State House. The story goes that the collection included 326 books, which represented £400 of the total gift. But again, we don't have much to go on except for the story that was written down decades after the fact. According to that story, when Increase Mather presented the books, he told the court, "Mr. President and members of the court, according to the will of the deceased, I present you with these books to be the beginning of a library for the intended college." Then apparently the court took a vote and decided to accept the books. However, there's no record of that vote in the official court minutes, so we may never know if that's true. One of the earliest references that we can find where the school was actually called Harvard College came in 1650 when Increase Mather attended a conference at the school that was also attended by the ministers from Connecticut and Rhode Island. But that wasn't the end of the story. You see, it's likely that John Harvard didn't intend for the college to be named after himself, but that's what ended up happening. However, he probably wouldn't have minded too much because in the letter to Elizabeth, John Harvard wrote, "My heart is that though I cannot be present amongst you in such a measure as I long for, yet I may in some measure be useful to the house of God and the good of the country, which is the end of human life and the reason of my coming into it." So John Harvard never intended for anything to be named after himself, but the settlers probably thought that the name would inspire future donors. And over the years, the school did grow. By 1657, it had over 200 students and eventually grew to become one of the largest colonial colleges. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think about the donation from John Harvard? Do you think that it was generous, or was it expected since he was a minister? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, big thank you to our supporters who help to make videos like this one possible. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider supporting us. And finally, if you want to learn more about how cities grow, be sure to check out our video on the history of zoning. Thanks for watching. See you next time.